Namaste nerds, this is Navanad with another Budget Pub Stompers video. Today we're going to do something totally different, a little casual and laid back, but this is going to be, I know I'm saying it's totally different, it's a tier list, but it is a different tier list because this is a tier list unlike anything you've probably seen. I can't imagine that you've seen this kind of tier list before, because this is not just going to be ranking commanders in order of power or popularity. But this is going to be ranking the commanders in terms of budget viability. So basically, if you were going to try to put together a $100 deck and you were looking through the top commanders or reaching back to your in your memory to think about, like, I don't know, old game store boogeymen, these are the kinds of commanders we're looking at. I did try to make sure we had at least like the top 10, but then I just picked ones that I thought would be interesting for discussion. But if you were building a $100 budget deck to try to compete with the top decks at your local game store, or even if you were building a $100 budget deck to play in a $100 league or a $100 max tournament, how viable would these be? Now, some of these commanders are, just because they are so popular, are just so expensive, they're kind of automatically off of the list if you're counting the commander in your $100 build. So I actually, just for the reasons of this specific deck, let's just say we're taking the expense of the commander out, and I'm going to be competing in a budget competitive league and tournament coming up shortly where they actually are excluding the cost of the commanders. So that's going to be how we rate it. Like, S is just like the best of the best, and A is going to be something I would recommend. If you came up to me and said, I want to make a control deck, and I would recommend a deck, that's going to be like A. B would be something I would not try to talk you out of. I'd say, yep, that's going to be just fine. C is going to be something like I might gently nudge you away from that commander, but that I think really could be built powerfully and would win some games even in a more competitive kind of atmosphere. Not cedh, but like, high power or $100 budget. And then D would be just don't. Like, it's just not going to work, so don't. These are in no particular order. In fact, I kind of just scrambled them. They're almost shuffled. But without further ado, let's look at our first guy, Edgar Markov. So Edgar, aside from his prohibitive expense, I don't think he's not, I don't know what he does. Like, I mean, I've seen it, but I don't know what he could reasonably add to a powerful strategy. I mean, you've got the Eminence ability, and Eminence is a little bit busted, but the Eminence ability, in order to use the Eminence ability, you have to pack your deck full of a bunch of vampires, and honestly, there's just not a whole lot of powerful vampires. I guess we could put some decent vampires in there and just kind of use the Eminence ability to farm value off of, like, culling the weaks and sacrifice things, deadly disputes, that kind of stuff. But I don't think that Edgar is going to get anywhere near a top pod, like a top 4 at a cedh event. And I also don't think he's a good option for budget commander, so he's just going to go right on down to D tier. Even if you have a copy of Edgar, if you're looking to build a powerful deck without spending a fortune, look elsewhere. Next is going to be the Rot Cleaver here. So Wilhelt the Rot Cleaver is a very interesting commander. Now, I had a buddy of mine kind of ask me to build a $100 version of this deck, and I tried. And it really does some interesting things. You have to use your imagination a little bit. You've got to actually brew and build, but it can do some powerful things. The problem I was running into with it is the $100 maximum is just a little bit too low to really get this thing going and doing anything really worthwhile. If you raise the budget to like $500, I think you could build a very powerful Wilhelt the Rot Cleaver deck. I don't want to spend an hour talking about the routes that I tried to take with it. I don't think we can do anything. We can't go anywhere that we want to be with Wilhelt without spending more than $100. But I do think you can do neat things. I ended up looking into like Rooftop Storm, that lets you cast all of your zombies for free and then peer into the abyss. You draw half your deck and put half your deck into play, and then you could usually win that way. But Peer into the Abyss is 7 mana, and Rooftop Storm is like 6. So I just don't think this is quite there. I think it's close, and I think if you spent a little extra money on it, you could get it to do something interesting. I even think after I explored it a little bit, and I was looking at like Razakath, reanimation kind of stuff, and of course there's the Gravecrawler things that are pretty key, and there's a bunch of things. I think if you were so inclined, you probably could build at least like a fringe cedh deck if you were budgetless. I don't think you can do any of that for $100. Next on the list is Kinrith. Kinrith the Return King. So he is kind of a Swiss Army knife. He's a little bit expensive in terms of mana cost, but he does give you access to all 5 colors. Now in cedh, access to all 5 colors is a good thing. It's a benefit. And in cedh, this is probably like an A tier commander. But in budget competitive, the 5 color thing it's almost like we could just cast this guy for white, so you could actually just pick a couple colors and build a 2 or 3 color version of Kinrith, which is what I think you'd end up doing at the budget at $100. But I don't think it's going to do things any better than any other commander for you. And the advantage of being 5 colors is not such an advantage when we're talking budget. It is an infinite mana outlet, and that's good. But that's a lot of commanders are infinite mana outlets that just have a little bit more text on them outside of just winning the game. So I think we're going to drop this guy down. Yeah, right about here. Let's go over here now. Next on the list is Dina Soul Steeper. So Dina has an ability, first of all, that forms a 1-card combo. It gives you access to a 1-card combo with your commander. It's a little bit expensive, but it is just going to win the game. Is it Sanguine Bond? It's one of the black enchantments that... there's a black enchantment that just combos and wins the game. Basically on the spot, you just have to do literally any amount of damage or gain any amount of life, and it starts a cascade of pings, and you win the game. So that's kind of cool. I've got a $100 version of her built on Moxfield, and I think it's powerful. I haven't played it in real life, but she's also a sacrifice outlet for Protean Hulk, and some of the Protean Hulk lines are very inexpensive to build. So I think Golgari actually ends up being a really strong budget option. I think Hulk ends up being a pretty strong budget option, and I think the accessibility of having another 1-card win condition is just super good, especially in a format where you don't have access to all the tutors you'd like to, like budget competitive. So I don't think it's like S tier, but I do think it's a pretty solid A tier. Moving on. The first sliver. What can we say about the first sliver? So slivers are obviously very, very powerful in combat metas where you're not comboing at all. But the other thing is the first sliver makes a pretty decent, it's 5 colors, and it's a food chain outlet. So it makes a pretty decent food chain deck in true competitive like cedh. How you get there is a little bit different than you might expect if you've not seen it or not played cedh. But the way to abuse the first sliver in casual combat metas is to jam your deck full of slivers, right? Obviously. The way to really abuse the first sliver in cedh, step 1 is you take all of the slivers out of your deck, and literally all of them. You don't play slivers in this deck. And kind of the way the cedh version works is it just casts food chain. You get access to food chain and squee or one of your cast from exile creatures, and it just allows you to go infinite and cast and recast the first sliver over and over, cascading through your deck. So it's 5 colors, it's an infinite mana outlet. So any way to get infinite mana, basically, not any way, you need a way to bring the first sliver in and out of existence. So, but you can do, so like Isochron Scepter Dramatic Reversal doesn't get you there, but you can do like your Temur Sabertooth Dockside Extortionist stuff works with this guy. So it's probably like in cedh, it's like probably a C tier. In casual, it's probably like A tier. But in budget competitive, I think we're down here. I just don't think we get enough out of it. Even in competitive, it's kind of like you're playing a 5-color deck, which is great, and it's an infinite mana outlet, which is great, but you sort of are playing without a commander. Your commander is simply there to win the game, so it isn't much like starting with an 8th card in your hand like a lot of the commanders tend to be. So yeah, don't do it. Don't try it. Next, Miriam, Sentinel Worm. So this guy is pretty cool. It's a little bit expensive to cast, but it's in good colors if you're trying to cast something fast. You've got rituals, you've got mana dorks. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield, you make a copy of it, basically. And it's not legendary. So I don't think there's all that many really powerful dragons that you'd want to play in cEDH or budget cEDH. I think you could probably make something that like scratches into the fringes of competitive. Maybe not. It's I don't think it's good. I don't think it's good enough. In budget, I think it's probably down here. I don't know. Let's see what I'd play it over Edgar. I'd play it over the first sliver, but I'd probably try one of these two ahead of it. So it'll stay right there at C tier. Hopefully some of this stuff is surprising, because if it's surprising, then maybe you're learning something. Next is this homie here. I don't even want to talk about Joda. So you've got pretty good colors. It's got an ability that if you build around it, it can be good, but building around that ability means that you're putting probably a bunch of really bad cards in your deck. And it's going to mean that if somebody kills your commander or there's a Drannith Magistrate in play, it just doesn't do anything, and then your deck is just bad. So I think we drop that into D tier. Krinko Mob Boss. This is an interesting one too. It's remained one of the most popular commanders for a long time, and there's good reason for that. In a purely combat meta, it makes a bunch of dudes. It's pretty powerful. You can do some busted stuff with it. In competitive EDH, I don't think it's quite there. I mean, you could make something, again, that kind of is fringe CEDH, but you've only got access to one color. If you're going to go one color in CEDH, you really have to have a very powerful effect. I don't think Krinko Mob Boss's ability quite gets you there, and I think whatever you're doing inside the 99 has to be so strong. And at that point, you'd probably be better off playing some other mono-red commander. But we're talking about budget, and a lot of the goblins are cheap, and Krinko's cheap, and a lot of the ways that you have to abuse Krinko are not that expensive. But the Krinko combo stuff I don't think is fast enough. It's a good plan B, but you do still have access to Kiki Jiki stuff, and specifically Goblin Recruiter with Conspicuous Snoop and Kiki Jiki. I think this is a B tier. I think for for budget competitive, the one color isn't hurting you. It's probably actually a good thing. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on lands. Most of your goblins are fairly inexpensive, and even your combo pieces are not that expensive. Kiki Jiki's a few bucks, but maybe 8, something like that. I think it's fine. I think it would be fine if you said, I'm playing in a $100 league. I'm building this, Krinko deck. You want to give me a hand with it? I would say sure, happily. Instead of, I don't think you should do that. Moving along. Urza, Lord High Artificer. Now this is the boogeyman of casual. It's hard to build a deck. I mean, I don't want to say it's hard to build a deck that isn't busted with it, but it's pretty easy to build a pretty broken deck with Urza. And in CEDH, I think it's probably something like a B or an A tier deck. I've built it on Moxfield, not in person, in the $100 budget level, and I think it's is it better than Dina? It might be. It's close. So I think we're gonna put Urza at the bottom of A tier. I'm sorry, top of A tier, or maybe it would even be the bottom of S tier. There are fairly inexpensive ways to just put a bunch of A plus B combos in your deck. You're playing a mana engine in the command zone, which is a big plus. A lot of the zero drop artifacts that he turns into rocks are cheap. And even the ISO-Rev combo is not totally prohibitively expensive, and you don't really need to play a win condition specifically in the deck. Like, you just go infinite mana, and then if your deck is built well, you can just win the game. Just have a cap size in your deck, right? If you have infinite mana, you can bounce Urza over and over and just flood the board with 1 billion powered guys. You can capsize every permanent that your opponents have. You can draw your deck, and once your opponent's got all their permanents in their hand, you could cast a windfall. I mean, there's myriad ways to win the game without actually having to play a bad win condition. Capsize isn't great, but it's not a dead card, right? So yeah, I know I'm kind of talking myself into Urza. Yeah, Urza's busted, and you can do cheap stuff. I'm gonna put it at the very bottom so far of S tier. I'm back and forth on this. We'll stick it here for now. Moving on. Niv Mizzet. So Niv Mizzet, in casual, it's a damn good deck. It's hard to build a casual version of it. I mean, if you're building Niv Mizzet Perun, you're going to play the Curiosity effects, and if you're playing those, you have, literal just one card combos with your commander, which kind of makes it hard to call it casual. But then its cast cost is really, really expensive. Without access to Dockside Extortionist and Jeweled Lotus, it's not the easiest thing in the world to get this guy in play. But when you're playing casual, you've got more time. You can load your deck full of counter spells and pyroclasm effects, board wipes, and you'll find enough time. I built a $100 version, a competitive version at $100, and I think it's pretty good. One of the key things to figure out is you want to use, I can't think of the name of it, the Suspend Lotus. Is it Lotus Blossom maybe? There's a Lotus that's got Suspend, but if you use Whir of Invention or any of your Whir of Invention-like spells that cheat it into play, or Goblin Engineer, to put it in, you can tutor the Lotus thing with the Goblin Engineer and then cheat it into play, then it's just like having a Black Lotus. So I found that you can get Niv Mizzet up and running turn 4, turn 5, which seems a little slow, but you also have a lot of control elements to the deck. I think it's probably better than Krinko, but I don't quite think it's A tier. It's doable. It's very doable. It can be a very powerful deck. Moving on to Brago. So I actually know a guy that is working on a $100 budget Brago deck, and I think it's pretty good. Yeah, if I was building a control deck, I think at $100, I think you could do worse than Brago. A lot of your effects that you want to play in the deck that just give you value when they come into play, the things you want to blink in and out of existence, are cheap. They're just really draft chaff for the most part, but he breaks them. And the main combo lines that you use with Brago also are not that expensive. Strionic Resonator, I think, is $4, and Brago goes ham with Strionic Resonator. I think this is better than Niv Mizzet. I don't think it's as good as Urza. Don't think it's as good as Dina. I think I'd put it right here. A tier. Maybe bottom of A tier. Probably better than either of these two. But there's probably going to be some A tiers that are better than Brago. Animar. Maybe this is a Speak of the Devil scenario. So Animar is a mana engine, in a way, right? Which is a good thing. It gives your creatures a cost reduction based on the number of counters that it has on it. And when you play a creature, you put a counter on it. So there's a lot of ways to abuse that. The probably easiest way to abuse it is to use Ancestral Statue, which is 20 cents. Ancestral Statue just is a 4-drop artifact creature. It says when it enters the battlefield, return target creature to owner's hand. It doesn't say you can't return it. It doesn't say return another creature. So if you have Impact Trimmers in play, or there's that Witty Roastmaster that if you've got counters on Animar, Witty Roastmaster instead of 3 mana will cost 1 red mana, and it just pings your opponents every time a creature enters the battlefield. You play the Ancestral Statue and just bounce it over and over. So you play it, it returns to hand, play it, it returns to hand. and kill the table that way. And while you're not infinitely comboing off with Animar, you are beating the table to death with nasty monsters that like have an actual game warping effect. This is a great commander. I don't love the fact that it's 3 colors, but if your commander has to be 3 colors in budget, Temur is probably the best. So this, if built correctly, I think is an A tier. I think it's good. Probably underrated in cEDH too. I think a lot of people would consider it a fringe commander, but I can't help but notice every time it enters a tournament, it wins the damn thing, you know? It's a little hyperbole. It's good. Animar's good. Mirren. So Mirren is a monster at casual. The amount of value that Mirren gives you is ludicrous, honestly. What she does, it just allows you to build up a lot of value. It's going to be hard for casual decks to keep up with. In competitive, so I think in cEDH this isn't like, it's probably like C tier, or I mean it's viable, so I don't want to say it's D tier. It's pretty good. The commander's pretty good. In $100 competitive, I just don't know what to do with it. I haven't tried to build it. I have a feeling that probably Dina and Grist are better, but maybe not. You do get the grind value, and in a slower game, a little bit less powerful game like $100 competitive, that grind value might actually be really good. So I'm debating between A and B. I would like to see somebody play that at $100 budget. I think you could do busted things with it. I think it would be a good value engine. But I don't think it's going to be better than some of your other options in the same colors. Moving on to Crick, another commander that I just don't know about. It's a mana engine. It wants you to use a bunch of pretty inexpensive cards. Like the bad tutors become pretty good when they're free. In competitive, I think it's a B tier. It's fast, you know. It's like S tier levels of fast when it gets a good hand. But it's kind of glass cannon-y. But also, it's pretty easily taken out of the game. Like if you just, especially in budget, I think if you set your sights on your opponent playing Crick and everybody just beats its life total down, I think it's going to have a real hard time. So I think in budget, I haven't seen the deck and I haven't tried to build it. I'd be interested to see, but I think I put it on the same arena as Mirren. I don't know which one's better. And I literally just don't know, but I think I would guess it would be very broken. And I'd like to help somebody build the deck. Let me know if you want to build a budget Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, or I'd even allow a postie. If you want to build a budget postie, I'm in for it. Moving on to Atraxa. This is one of the most beloved commanders. If I'm not mistaken, it's number 1 over the last couple of years. Atraxa's Praetor's Voice, yep, it's ranked number 1. It's the most popular deck, 31,877 according to EDH Rec, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out why in the hell that would be. I mean, in casual, I think it's fine. I'm looking from a competitive perspective. I don't think it's a cEDH deck, and that's really kind of what we're talking about. I also just don't think it's a budget cEDH deck. Ishin. So this one's really cool. If I were going to build just a strictly casual commander, this would be in my like top 10 list. It's like a Panharmonicon for attack triggers, pretty sure. Yeah. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. So like your professional Facebreaker can make 6 treasures instead of 3. Your what's the 4 mana Facebreaker? Grim Hireling makes up to, jeez oh Pete's. Does that make up to 12 treasures? Boy, I'm talking myself into this guy. The problem is I just don't think there's any way to win the game. So I think the way you'd want to do is you'd want to build like a Staxy value-based deck. But I don't know how you're actually closing the game. So I don't think it's a very good cEDH commander. And I wouldn't recommend it for budget. It's also 3 colors, which isn't a good thing when you're trying to build an inexpensive mana base. I think it's probably here. Although I would probably rank it higher than that guy. And honestly, if my life depended on winning a budget cedh event and I had to use Kinrith or Ishin, I think I would take Kinrith, and I would just make it like a 2 or 3 color deck and just like ISO rev people to death. Yeah, so I think that's about the right way to rank them. Let's do Yuriko. Okay, so Yuriko is one of the most popular commanders. I mean, it is up there, right? Yep, it's ranked number 5. And it's a good cedh deck. Dimir is good. It's a really good value engine. And it's a mana engine in a way. Like it's a value engine and it helps you cheat mana. It's not a mana engine. And it plays a bunch of draft chaff that not very many people are interested in, which keeps the budget down. I think it's just one of the best decks in the $100 sub format. If you're going to build a $100 budget deck and you want to win games, Yuriko I don't think it's impossible to beat, but it's hard to beat. I mean, it's consistently doing nasty things. You've got removal colors and control colors, and you've got inevitability because your commander will just make the table dead eventually. You're drawing plenty of cards to keep controlling the table, and you're just burning your opponents out. You're probably not going to jam Thassa's Oracle or Doomsday in your $100 deck, but you can do that in cedh. But even just a bunch of ninjas and then like big mana cost spells, especially ones that have alternative cast costs, and you will get everybody dead eventually. Moving right along. So let's talk about this guy. I don't even know what this thing does. So this is 11th ranked most popular deck. Whenever it deals damage, reveal that many cards, put dinosaurs into play, whatever. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this guy. I guess it must be at least somewhat powerful in kind of combat-based metas, but it's not a cedh deck, and I don't think it's going to be a good budget deck. Kennen, on the other hand, is another S tier. Kennen is very good at controlling the game. It's not as fast as some of the decks, but it's plenty fast. You can pretty easily Goldfish turn 4 wins with a $100 Kennen deck, and that's in my list, which is not even really focused on the Basalt Monolith combo so strictly. I mean, it does, of course, but because Kennen plus Basalt Monolith just gives you infinite mana. So it's sort of a one-card combo. You need something to wash your mana, like to change your colorless mana into colored mana, but there's no lack of those to choose from. I'll just say the deck is very strong early. It's encouraging. It's a mana engine. It's got a one-card combo with a cheap card and cheap ways to clean your mana. And even though it's not exactly a one-card combo to win the game, it's like an A plus B, but it's like a Kennen plus A plus B, but Kennen with those cards individually is also broken. And if you do get to a point where you can make infinite mana of any color, Kennen will itself win the game because it's not only the mana engine, but it's also a mana outlet. So it's just it's top tier. It's S tier, 100%, without a doubt. Let's talk about this guy. So this little dog has been riling the community up. I don't know. I mean, truth told, I don't know what the casual community is getting all riled up about. I think it'll probably shoot to the top of the most popular decks in recent history. But when you look for it again in 2 years, you may not find it. I don't mean that it's not powerful in a combat meta. I just don't think it's nearly as powerful as what people are thinking it is right now. It's not that fast. It takes time to get going. And even though it's got the ward, any board wipe just takes it totally out of the game. I don't see it. So, and it's my list, and we're not talking about casual anyway. So it's in D tier. D for don't. What about this thing? So when I bring up budget commander with people, pretty often they talk to me about this elf. Lateral Blade of the Elves. It's basically like a Tana, if you're familiar with Tana. And I know a lot of cedh players are familiar with Tana, but a lot less are familiar with what it actually does on the battlefield because you don't cast Tana very often. It's usually just like I play it as a commander partner in Malcolm Tana, but I literally just use it for colors and also the fact that you can sacrifice it to Birthing Pod or Birthing Pod effects. And Lathril, you're going to build around specifically Lathril. It's in good budget colors. When it deals combat damage, you make an elf. I guess you're just trying to flood the board with elves and then tap 10 to make your opponents dead in a few turns. I don't know. I don't know how you accomplish this effectively. Seaborn Muse would help. I don't know. I'm not convinced. I've not seen it built competitively. I think it's worse than Mirren if you're in those colors. If you want to do elves, it's worse than Marwyn. I don't know why we'd play it. But I don't think it's unplayable though. I think it's probably Krinko-esque. So we're going to put it at the bottom of B tier. Right next to Krinko, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. So speaking of elves, let's talk about Marwyn. Where does Marwyn fit on the list? Just seriously, obviously, a very easy S tier commander in my view. If you doubt that, I think you should watch my video primers on Marwyn. I've done part 1 and part 2. One's like a deck tech, and then the other one's just watching me go through test hands. And in that video, you'll see that more of the games were ended on turn 3 than weren't. How I rank Kinnan compared to her, they're like this. They're just like this. I think I would probably play Kinnan over Marwyn, but that might just be a style, like a stylistic preference. And I think I would rather play Marwyn than Yuriko. I might rather play Yuriko, but I think Marwyn probably is the more powerful deck. But it's close. All 3 of these could be number 1. They're all close. The washing machine. So this thing is a really good cEDH deck. I mean, it's 2 colors. It's just, blue-white's not got the best ways to end the game. But it is an Isochron Scepter Dramatic Reversal outlet. If you can draw your deck, you don't need usually a win condition outside of just drawing your deck. We're going from cEDH, which I think it's like a B tier commander in cEDH. But if we're going to budget, the problem is going to be you're not going to be able to do the cool stuff like with Hullbreaker Horror or Tidespout Tyrant. A lot of the decks don't play any other creatures, and they just use their pilot. They make a pilot. You hit it with a polymorph, which lets you flip through your deck until you find a creature, and the only creatures in the deck are Hullbreaker Horror and or Tidespout Tyrant. And Tidespout Tyrant or Hullbreaker Horror, if you are not familiar, will go infinite mana with any 2 rocks as long as one of them is mana neutral and the other is mana positive. So if you've got like Jeweled Amulet, a 0 mana, you could do this even in budget. 0 mana, Jeweled Amulet, and a Soul Ring. With Hullbreaker Horror or Tidespout Tyrant, they let you bounce one thing whenever you cast another thing. So you can tap your Soul Ring for 2 mana, cast the 0-drop, bounce the Soul Ring, use one of the 2 floating mana to play your Soul Ring, to bounce the 0-drop, tap your Soul Ring, play the 0-drop, bounce your Soul Ring. And then when you're in this infinite mana loop with Tidespout or Hullbreaker, then you can also bounce Shorikai to your hand and recast it, and bounce it to your hand and recast it. So it's like it's pretty much the same thing as Dramatic Reversal, Isochron Scepter, and then eventually you're just going to like play Blind Obedience and just extort people to death. I'm talking myself into this thing being powerful. I've built around on it a little bit. It's hard to do the Tidespout thing because you just don't have that many mana neutral or mana positive rocks. But still, it's an Isorev outlet. It's a hell of the card advantage that comes off this thing is not to be trifled with. Like, do not sleep on this ability to pay 1 mana, draw 2 cards, and discard a card. That's a really good engine. So it's a good value engine. It's low color. I guess the question here is, would I rather play Shorikai or Brago? So for sure, if we're playing cEDH, Shorikai. But I think Brago actually is slept on in cedh. I think you can make a fine deck with it. In budget, I think I would play Brago first, or I would recommend Brago over Shorakai. But they're like this. They're like super duper close. Alright, we're down to a few commanders. What do we got left? The Dragon. So we already talked about Miriam and how there's not that many really powerful dragons. We also talked about the Imminence ability and how it's intrinsically broken. But I don't think... we also talked about how 5 colors in cedh is real good. I don't think it's going to be a cedh deck anytime soon. I mean, if you had to play it, you could make just a 5 color 99 that wins games. But I think you just basically would ignore your commander. And it's a lot better to have a commander than to not have a commander. In budget, I guess you'd just be doing like Dragon Beatdown with like the best control elements in 5 color. Yeah, but then you have to spend all the money on the mana. I think it's a strictly casual commander. And really, I don't even know what I guess the allure is the dragons themselves, right? Like, dragons are fucking cool. That's the allure. Speaking of dragons being fucking cool. Second to last guy is Magda. Magda is a very good cedh deck, probably A tier. I think its biggest advantage in budget is pretty hard to overstate, and that is if you're building a fully tuned, fully optimized version of Magda, and there's lots of ways to build Magda, but you could build like a cedh Magda that is a viable Magda deck that people would look at and say, yep, that's perfect, and then you could take 10 cards out of it and sub in another 10 cards that aren't that bad, and you'd be at $100. It's hard for that not to be S tier. It's a mana engine. It turns all of your 10-cent 1-mana dwarfs into Ragavans. It gives you the outlet to spend your 10 treasures that you make with your army of Ragavans. It combos off with a dollar card, Clock of Omens. It's just so good, right? It's just so good. At $100, it's almost as good as it is, at full power. Then, I mean, it's close. I think it's Morrowind good. I think it's Kinning good. I don't know. I think it's better than Yuriko. It's faster. It can grind. And like Morrowind, it sort of folds to a board wipe. Man. Is it better or worse than Morrowind? So the way I build it at $100, I do build it sort of proactively. I found that when you're playing in a $100 budget meta, Magda is very likely to be the fastest deck in the pod. And so if you're the fastest deck in the pod, then you've kind of... then usually you're just going to look to go for it underneath your opponents. And if you're going to try to go for it under your opponents, I think you're better in Morrowind. But you don't have to go first with Magda. And you kind of really do have to go first in Morrowind before other decks get established and can shut you down. Boy, this is tough. I'm going to say... I think I'm going to put it... Boy, I'd put it even with Morrowind. I think we're going to put it right here. But any of these could be the number one deck. Speaking of decks that have been the number one deck, Winota took the tournament cedh format by storm. It was easily one of the top 2, 3, 4 decks in the format until everybody learned that it's really pretty easy to stop the deck, is you just have to kill Winota. The problem is you only have to kill her one time because then she costs 6 mana. And your strategy without Winota is pretty bad. Now your strategy with Winota is off the chain. There's a reason that this legend has been banned in formats. It's stupid. Like, the text box is legitimately stupid. It's a mana engine. It's a card draw engine. It's not in the best colors, but you kind of want to be doing like Hate Bears, stacksy things anyway. And if you're like playing a game of Hate Bears, stacks, Protect the Queen, you could be in worse colors than Boros for exactly this strategy. I I don't think it's as good as maybe some people think it is in budget, but if it's not A tier, it's like top of B tier. I think it's better than any of these. Yeah, it's super strong. It just sort of folds to swords to plowshares. I think it's top of B tier. Is it worse than Brago? I think it is. Is it worse than Shurikai? I think it is. Worse than Animar? Yep, it's worse than all these. It's B tier. I feel pretty confident putting it in B tier. It won't be a popular opinion. It's my list, and that is the end of my list. So until next time, may the force be with your mothers. Namaste. East side till I die, and peace.